Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm here with one of my favorites today, one of my favorite middle grade novelists for so many reasons, Ann Braden. Ann, welcome to the Kid Lit Love podcast. Thank you so much for helping me kick this whole thing off.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
So your ears may have been ringing a couple of days ago. Because I was in my children's literature class. I teach a Kid Lit class for teachers who are either becoming teachers or who are teachers. We spend the whole semester reading a lot of wonderful books. And they asked me if I could only pick one book, what would my favorite middle grade novel be? Which is a horrific question to ask someone who reads so much, right? You can't possibly narrow it down to one. I've got favorites because of how much I love the characters. I have number one books because they help me see things differently. And then I have other number one books because I know other kids will feel seen and heard.
Exactly.
But if I got to be selfish and just pick the one middle grade novel that was just me, just my favorite Stephanie, because of how I felt, because of how it just reached in and gave my little inner child a big giant hug, because it made me just feel better after flipping that last page. Hands down, my number one, although I will have a lot of second runner-ups, hands down, it's The Benefits of Being an Octopus, your debut novel. So close to my heart.
Oh, that means so much to me.
I loved it. And I have since loved your other books as well. We have 3 books that we're kind of going to tease a little bit today. But I'm just so grateful because they're like little wrapped gifts that you put into the world for readers. And that one along with my octopus sticker, by the way, is always close by on my shelf.
That's great. And I love that analogy. I am really bad at actually wrapping gifts. I'm like a stuffed animal with no thumbs. And so I like thinking about like, this is my way of wrapping up gifts is,
That's
right. 5 years of work at a keyboard.
So, I just gave a what I hope was a wonderful introduction to introduce you to listeners, but why don't you take over? Give listeners a little bit of the backstory, who you are, your wonderful books that you're reading, and how you became my number one.
Well, I should start off by saying that when I was a kid and an early adult, I never thought writing was something I could do. It was like at the top of my list of things I can't do. So that's an important thing to know. I became a middle school social studies teacher and loved the kids so much. And I loved getting to wake them up about the world and like capture them at the time when they feel like you can do something about this stuff. Like that is unfair. And what can we do? And so I love that age. And so when I had kids, I stayed home from the classroom and I was really bored because my son would only sleep on like when I was holding him. And so I was stuck for hours at a time and I was reading a lot. And I just got to this one part where she was talking about, being a writer. And I was like, oh, she's so great. And I just started, I wrote originally out of boredom, like it was something I could do. And I was just playing, like, what can I, like, it took me 2 months to come up with an idea, but then it was like, well, I like babies are little for a really long time. So then 7 years of rejection and like 5 different manuscripts that all got rejected. And then my 6th manuscript was The Benefits of Being an Octopus. So that was my first published book. And it was at a time, I wrote it at a time when I figured something else would get published first. And so I could just be honest with that one.
Oh.
Um, and then of course, when the other things didn't get published, I was like, no one's ever going to read this or buy it or anything. So it's been quite a journey. So that one came out in 2018, and now I have 3 out, and I'm working on the next one. And each of my books sort of, I really want to honor kids where they are during those, 11, 12, 13 years old ages, because I think they're so pivotal, and so much of our whole humanity boils down to what, like everything is right there. It's like a microcosm of everything that happens in life. And so I love, it's heavy. Like I want to talk about the real stuff, but I also want it to not be too heavy. So I like to have like a weird animal that I use as a metaphor, to dig deeper into that human psyche, specifically middle schooler psyche. And so first one is The Benefits of Being an Octopus, about this girl, Zoe, who she's got so much to juggle at home because she's got to take care of her younger siblings, and they don't quite have enough money to have a lot of the freedoms that most people have. And she just never sees herself as having strengths, even though she's incredibly strong and incredibly responsible. So the book is about her recognizing this inner strength that she has inside her and finding the courage to say the hard things she needs to say. And then my second book, Flight of the Puffin, is about 4 kids in different parts of the country. And it explores sort of the ways that we're connected, even when it seems like we're really different on the surface. I wrote it at a time when there was a lot of people trying to divide one group of people from another in our country. And I just spent a lot of time in lots of different schools and places that should have been very different. And I thought, yeah, there's superficial differences, but as soon as you start talking to kids at the level of the heart, there's so much connecting us all. So I wanted to tell that story. And then my latest one, Opinions and Opossums, is like me in book form. my youth, wrestling with all the big questions about religion that I didn't think I was allowed to say out loud, which I probably wasn't really. And really just sort of, I really want kids to feel like it's okay to be asking questions about things. Like asking questions is how we come to understand things for ourselves and have things make sense to ourselves rather than having it just told to us. And how we can sort of question some things that don't make sense. And I think a lot of times the things that don't feel good to us, especially when we're younger, but even as adults, they make us question ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I want us to be turning it around. And if something's not making you feel good, try questioning that.
Yeah. That's a huge perspective shift right there. It's a hard one, but boy, imagine if we could learn that in middle school.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, the different life trajectories that could open up for so many of us.
Yeah.
I do love the animals in each of them. I mentioned my octopus sticker. I took the pledge at NCTE. That was a big deal.
I just gave that pledge to kids in Maine yesterday.
I love it. I love it. And it's just what I love is that it takes these big concepts, right? You have such beautiful themes that run across the books, right? There's connection, there's kindness, there's courage, there's hope. There are so many things. And when I think of each of your books, that animal just symbolizes them so beautifully, right? It helps the reader just tap into it. Like when that octopus is, it's not really a mantra, but it's kind of a mascot in a lot of our lives, right? For just thinking of that. And the puffin, every time I think of puffin now, well, first of all, I went to my local grocery store soon after reading that, and I couldn't believe I found puffin cereal. I was so excited that I made that connection. But when I think of puffin now, I think of one of the lines in that book that I love is the fistful of paper love bombs. And that just kind of captures the spirit of the book. I think right now more than ever, the world needs a book like Opinions and Opossums with so much going on that could be questioned, that could be internalized instead of talked about in a curious, open kind of way. Can you dive a little bit more into the plot of
Yeah.
Opinions and Opossums for readers
Yeah.
that haven't read it yet?
So it's about sort of what do you do when you're not sure you believe what the other people around you believe?
Mhm.
And so it focuses on Agnes. She's in 7th grade, and she's been raised by her single mom to not question authority. That's really key because her mom's job is really important to their livelihood, and her mom's boss is this guy who's really religious. He's like a big member of their church, and so Agnes's participation in things at church comes with like an extra weight where she has to do a good job so she doesn't mess up her mom's job. Um, and so she needs to take this confirmation class, and she's having a hard time, wrestling with like God always seems to be pictured one way in her church. And when she pictures him looking like that, she can't imagine him loving her. And she doesn't understand why so much gets blamed on Eve and why everything has to stem back to that. But she doesn't feel like she can ask any of these questions. So she's just going to try to keep her mouth shut until there's one kid from the confirmation class decides that just to be sure that they're all really on board, they should all sign a pledge form saying they believe in God, which is honestly something that happened to me in my youth group at church. Straight on. And Agnes cannot figure out what to do. She's not sure she believes in God, but she also believes in God enough to not feel like she can just lie on a form at church. And so she's really in this bind trying to figure out what to do. And she has a couple of awesome people to turn to in her life. And one of them is her best friend, Mo. And they are used to being pretty out of the box because their hobby is writing stories from the perspective of abandoned shopping carts. So like they are weird together. And so Mo is a great person to be able to ask weird, bizarre questions to. And then she also has this neighbor who she hasn't really gotten to know until recently, Gracie, who's an anthropologist, an old lady anthropologist who's been doing this a long time. And Gracie gets her thinking after they rescue this opossum together, because the possum was playing dead in the middle of the road, about to get run over by cars. And that possum, Agnes keeps thinking about that possum, of like what that possum would say if that possum was writing a journal, for example. Because there's this guy who drives by and is like, and like, but the possum has all these babies in her pouch, and like, so Agnes is really starting to identify with this possum in this deep way that she cannot quite figure out why. And so she's starting to explore things from the possum's perspective, and the possum's pretty angry, and it's a way that she doesn't feel like she's allowed to be angry, but this possum can be angry. And so it's sort of between Mo and Gracie and the possum, Agnes starts to explore things and starts to question things and starts to gather the courage to be her full, big thinking, big questioning self out in the world.
Yeah. I think we all need a Gracie.
I love
Gracie. I'm just going to adopt her as my hypothetical neighbor, that I could do with all of that information and the ability to just help you think differently in an instant. Yes. Yes. We all need a Gracie. Yeah, there is so much in that book, I think, that any reader can relate to, right? Because even though, yes, religion is a key part of the book, we all have something that might be questioning or wondering about or confused about or feel like we can't talk about. And seeing Agnes go through her journey just gives readers, I think, courage to think that the same is possible for them.
Because you don't feel alone anymore. Like I think so much of it when you can't talk about something, you feel like I'm the only one with this question. Like I'm the only one with any of these questions. And so the idea of that, at least there's this other person, fictional, but someone had to write her, that like I'm not alone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I will talk about characters, I'll try to be make an example, for my kids or something. And I'll say, well, so and so did this, this, and this. They're like, Mom, is that real or fictional? Doesn't matter. It's all real. It's all there for us to relate to and connect to and just see a different story, literally, play out as something that we might consider for our own lives, which is why I love your book so much, because all three of your books do that, but in very different ways.
Mm.
For different scenarios, different stages of not stages of life, they're all children, but just different things that may be weighing on kids, or
Yeah.
they're trying to figure out. There's a place for every reader, young and, I'm not going to say old, I'm going to say adult, in all of the books. I think those themes are just they're so powerful.
Thank you.
How So I know, because we've gotten to talk before, that you mentioned that there are pieces of you
Mm.
in all of your books, maybe some pieces bigger than others, since opinions on opossums seem more based on your experience. But how do you decide what that theme, what that animal, what that piece of you is going to be in your books?
I often start with what am I angry about?
Ah,
And
okay.
so that's going to be personal. And sometimes it's from a long time ago, and sometimes it's more recent, but um, it's means that the book instantly has passion, a reason to exist,
Yes.
a problem that you've got to figure out. And it's really therapeutic for me. But I also feel like I'm probably not alone in being angry about it, whatever it is. And there's so often like where girls don't have permission to be angry, you know?
Right.
And so I feel like, however, I mean, there's a lot of boys in Flight of the Puffin and specifically, but I feel like tackling anger, something that makes you angry, it means that it's like pointing out what, like, if it's like anger is like a warning sign of like, I can do something about this. Something needs to change, right? It doesn't have to just end in anger. Anger is a problem when we feel powerless to do anything. And so I try to go from anger to a place where people can see ways to take action about whatever it is, in however it fits into their lives. Because then it's like, no, it's about social justice at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that is sort of my starting point. And then the animals, this one, I did not come up with the idea of Finner Possum myself. I had the idea it was going to take place in a suburban town, like where I grew up, that was very conforming. And I knew I sort of wanted to explore these big issues of religion and sort of how the history of women is told. Like often, like when you picture cavemen, don't picture the women.
Right.
Like, are they like waiting back at the cave? Like, what are they doing? Like, it never comes up in like anyone's, some people's consciousness, but most people, you don't
Right.
even think about them. And so I really wanted to explore like the way stories are told and how who is telling the story affects so much of our understanding of culture and our society and everything that's current, even though it's all been, layers from the past. I was a middle school social studies teacher, right? I was like, oh, history stuff. And so I had that stuff, but I wasn't sure what the weird animal was going to be yet. And I was out to dinner with these librarians in Virginia, and one of them turned to me and she's like, what about an opossum for your next book? And I was
Oh,
like,
I love it.
oh my gosh, like a roadkill opossum, specifically the featured animal of suburbia. Like, you don't see animals unless they're like squirrels or dead opossums. And so I just thought about all the metaphors that there are with that. And yeah, so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm totally gonna make this work. And then in the editing process, my editor's like, no, the possum can't be dead. And I was like, it's playing dead. This works too. So yeah, I feel like and there's just I really like animals that are underestimated, and
Right.
and like possums are really totally underestimated. Like, and they eat ticks like they're vacuum cleaners. So It's
I did not know that.
yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well, I love something you said. You talked about, you said like reachable social justice, right? That you do close the last pages of the book feeling like there is hope in whatever topic it was, whether the characters found their own hope, whether the reader is finding hope. And there's something that likely could be sparked from the book that we could do to just feel better. Yeah, whether
Yeah.
it's doing something with our own anger or just doing something to make a connection, to reach out, to soothe ourselves. You really do walk away with kind of these little actions you can take to make yourself and the world a better place. And it only takes that one little thing that
Yes.
has a domino effect.
Yes. And I think that that's something I've really learned. I was a community organizer in between when my kids were little. And one of the things that was so powerful is how, yeah, we can feel so powerless when we feel alone. And it's like, how am I going to fix this giant issue by myself? Like, there's no way. But if you can take one tiny step forward, it makes the next step possible. And you don't have to fix the issue with the tiny step. You just have to find a way to just sort of tackle one tiny part of the issue. And then it's a little bit better. And then you can take the next step and tackle another tiny little part. And I think I've seen it work so often in my own experience that, and I think it's not talked about enough, like the power of these tiny little steps, like that we as one person can do. And so like if it's like asking a question or sending a postcard um or talking to someone that might feel this, like having a discussion with someone else who might feel the same way about something, then you have two people that are trying to decide what can we do. Like I mean, that's where the postcards idea came from, that sort of launched into the
Yeah.
Flight of the Puffin. I was feeling powerless to do anything about all the hate that was going on in the world, but I had experience doing community organizing at that point. And I was like, okay, I know there's other people who feel the exact same way. I just have to find them, talk to them, ask them, what do you think we could do? Have enough conversations at some point we'll come up with a possible small action step. And it was like, what about sending postcards? And that was after like a couple weeks of talking to people. It's not like it was suddenly there, but I feel like you have to know that it's possible to do that, and you'll eventually get there.
Yeah. And that's so after I finished reading Flight of the Puffin, I tend to, after I read every book, I think like, what's one little thing that I can take forward from the book to my own life to make it better? And I sent a combination of text, emails, and good old fashioned postcards to people in the mail.
Awesome.
And, like you said, it's one small little thing, but the responses, the replies, oh my gosh, this was so nice. It just has this magnified effect on that one little tiny thing that can make such a big difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thinking of, because you mentioned you're working on the fourth book. I don't know what you can say about the fourth book, but are you going along with the same trajectory? Will it have themes that are important to you, that are pieces of you? Is there an animal?
Yes. So this is my third attempt on my next book, and this one is the one that is completely following the trajectory. The others are crazy out there, and but no, I'm like, okay, this is where I need to be. This is like, and so I was thinking, okay, one of the things I love about my three books is that they each tackle a topic that is big and affecting kids, but is not talked about that often. And so I was like, what else is there? Like I did like, economic difference and political divides and, and religion. And I was like, oh, death. The fact that we all die at some point. I feel like I know from my own family that going from elementary school to, well, we have a K-6 school here, going to middle school, that was like this existential crisis of like, I'm on a fast track to being an adult. Then it's you get a job, then you die. And it was a really rough summer. um, and I'm so conscious about how people feel that. Like, I mean, we all are going to die at some point. So we all feel this at some point. And we don't talk about it that often, especially at those ages. And so I wanted to sort of explore that. And it's something where I feel like people come to it in different ways. And so I have two kids that are not exactly friends, they're neighbors. And they're kind of coming at it in each in their own way. Both living affected by it, but being affected in different directions. And so I'm 60% of the way through the draft, and it's starting to feel very real. And the animal is the immortal jellyfish, which is this it's this jellyfish the size of like your fingernail, and when it gets old or starts to run out of food or gets injured, it can go back to its larva stage and regrow an infinite number of times.
Oh,
There's actually the scientist in Japan who's been studying them for 30 years and is like convinced he's going to find the immortality switch in their genetic code within his lifetime. So one of the characters is really into this.
that's exciting.
So I feel like, and then the question, like, would you really want to do that? Like, I don't know
Right.
if you want to do that.
True.
But I feel like there's a lot to unpack and explore. And it's all set in this, I started writing it before the summer. But it's set in a very flash flood affected town in Vermont that gets cut off from everything around it. And so unfortunately then that happened. And I was like, oh, what did I do? But yeah, so death is sort of on their minds in a variety of ways. So yeah, we shall see.
Wow. So definitely keeping in line with kind of the power of your other books. It's a topic that maybe isn't easy to talk about, but every kid goes through, every adult goes through.
And death comes up all the time in books, but it's always about grief. Like it's about other people dying and being sad. And so I was like, but what about us? What about the living people going to die? So yeah, my dad died when I was a baby, and it has always affected the way I see life. Like you just never know how, like, I feel like I've been on a sort of a fast track of, you got to do stuff now because you just don't know how long you have. And, and that's not necessarily the healthiest way. So partly I was like, I went into this knowing that I had to figure out some stuff for myself in the process of this book. And I had this epiphany the other day that I was like, oh my gosh. So this book is helping me in this, like, as much as I am, creating the book.
Well, and you mentioned that your other books did that too. You said you called it therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank goodness for that.
So if you're 60% the way through, I'm curious, how do you get to the other 40? Are you I write every day a certain time, or I write when inspiration strikes, or how do you get to the finish line?
When I am drafting, I try to write often, but I also, this one, I'm going back and forth with my editor a little bit more. So part of me is like, I might wait to hear back from her. I'm going to send her this chunk in the next couple of weeks. Once I get it a little bit tighter and more ready. But so I was thinking, like, do I keep writing? I kind of know what's gonna, like, I have actually known the last 40% of this book better than what I just got, like what I just wrote for a while. So I'm excited to write it. I always have a better time with like the bad guys after me, Dark Night of the Soul, all those lost moments. Those are always so cathartic to write. Not like I know exactly how it's going to end, but I think we'll see. I'm going to NCTE and I'm really excited for that. And that'll be, it's hard to write and travel. I kind of do one or the other. And so I know I will not be traveling at all after Thanksgiving. So that will be like, I will definitely finish it then. December and January is my goal, but maybe I'll just keep going until then too.
So will it be released, you think, sometime in 2024? I know that sometimes it's got this long. No. Okay. Oh, we've got to wait.
Oh yeah, it's due to my editor in its full draft form by February, and so then it's a whole, at least I'd say 2 years.
Oh gosh! Oh my goodness!
I mean, so because then I haven't done revisions with her yet,
right.
Like
all the
it's
things that
it's a long
come
process.
after the
Yeah,
writing.
and then once I am fully done with it, then it's a year. So I mean, it could be a little less than 2 years from February, but probably not much.
Okay.
So
Well, we
early,
got a
what is
sneak
that,
peek.
26?
We'll just be happy with the sneak peek we have, and then we will wait
Yes,
somewhat
hopefully we will
patiently.
all live long enough to get to get there.
Well, I'm fascinated by the animal because
Yeah.
I didn't know such a thing existed, so I can't wait to see how all of that comes together like it did in the other books too. Oh,
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like it's so funny. I was telling my family that idea I had, and I hadn't told them the animal yet. And my son's like, "You should do the immortal jellyfish." And I was like, "I know." That's
wow. See that inspiration that started on the couch all those years ago is just continuing from your
now
kids
he's
to the
fully in
books
my
now.
demographic.
Oh, well, I will somewhat patiently wait for that. I'm excited for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and definitely will be one of the first readers eagerly waiting for it to come out. So, how about you tell everybody where can they find you if they want to learn more about your books, about because you do have a lot of social action around your books to learn about the postcards. The puffin was this whole big giant read aloud, which was wonderful as well. Where can they find more about you?
So my website has a lot of resources for educators, like videos and yeah, downloadable things. And so that's annbradenbooks.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram mostly now. I'm on Instagram at Ann Braden Books and at Facebook at Ann.B.Braden. As you know, Facebook's fun.
And
But
I'll put those in the notes too, so people
okay.
can just do a quick click of them.
Thank you. And my the other thing is that I if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get notifications when there's going to be, I'm starting to do writing retreats for adults. And like I'm doing one in a week or so that's just a weekend, and then I'm going to do another one Memorial Day weekend. And it's just such a, I just had my own little 1-day writing retreat this past week, and oh my god, like that's the reason I got to where I've gotten to in this book. Like it's amazing what happens when your mind is not splintered into 16 different directions of direct distractions. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so if people are interested in that, signing up for my newsletter is a great way to get on in the know.
Yeah, and I will put out in public for the universe that I am going to get to one at some point, whether it's a 1 day, better yet, the full shebang. It'll happen.
But one day I've learned it really is, and it helps to have slept over the night before and wake up with none of the distractions,
Yes.
But
And ready
yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's exciting. I'll put all the links on the show notes so everybody knows where to find you. Thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I so appreciate you helping me kick off this new project, and then in whatever 2020 something that fourth book comes out, we'll have you back on.
That sounds great. It's always so lovely to talk with you, Stephanie, and this is a real pleasure.
Oh, thanks so much, Ann. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.